When I was a little young, my mother separated my bed. At night, I used to be afraid, so I was sleeping with my mother. One night, I accidentally went to my father's bed. My father, by mistake, when enter his 13 inches, I scream. Then what happened? But before going into details, first of all, I want to know that if you like our previous video, then comment, "Man, yes," and subscribe to our channel. I was only 15 years old at the time. Our home was very small, just one room and a tiny veranda. That was our entire world. I was starting to grow up, and my mother often seemed worried because of it. I was an only child, the sole daughter of my parents. My father was an addict, and this scared my mother constantly. She would worry that something might happen, that my father might change his intentions toward me. After all, a man's nature is unpredictable. No one knows when he might change. When I was younger, I used to sleep beside my mother, but as I grew older, she made me sleep separately. Now, I slept in a corner by myself. However, by nature, I was a very timid girl. Small things frightened me easily. I was especially scared of the dark, so most nights I would still prefer to sleep near my mother. Sometimes in the middle of the night, my mother would scold me and send me back to my own bed. But if I stood beside her pillow and started crying, she would reluctantly let me lie beside her. In the morning, though, she would scold me again, saying, "I've set your bed apart, so you don't need to crawl into my bed or your father's bed." I didn't understand why she was so strict with me about this. I never asked her why she treated me this way. I would just silently endure her scolding during the day. Yet deep down, I always wondered why she kept insisting that I stay away from them. I was growing older, but my behavior was still very childish. I didn't realize at the time that these actions of mine might one day lead me into trouble. I was afraid of my father because when he was under the influence, he completely lost his temper. He would hurl filthy curses at me and even hit my mother. Whenever he came home intoxicated, my mother would hide me in the bathroom. I never understood why. She wouldn't let me come out until an hour or an hour and a half had passed, only once my father was asleep. I wanted to ask her so many times why she hid me every time he came home, but she never gave me an answer. She would just look at me with tearful eyes and say, "You can never trust a man. Your honor is in your own hands. You must protect yourself." Sometimes I would stay quiet after hearing this. Other times, her vague explanations would make me angry. She never fully explained, leaving me frustrated and confused. My mother was a timid woman by nature. Whenever my father showed the slightest anger, she would start trembling and would immediately hide me in the bathroom. One night, it was pitch black. Power outages were common in our area. Our home was in a small, underdeveloped neighborhood, and electricity would come and go frequently. On that night, the power was out, leaving the house in darkness. I had fallen asleep quietly in my corner, but in the middle of the night, I woke up feeling unusually hot. As I sat up and looked around the room, it was completely enveloped in darkness. I was terrified of the dark, so I immediately got up and, feeling my way through the room, made my way to my mother's bed. I had no idea that tonight, this small act would lead to such a big mistake. I tried to find a space and slip into my mother's cot. At first, I noticed a strange, unpleasant smell near her, but I brushed it off and lay down beside what I assumed was my mother. I rested my arm on her chest, only to realize within seconds that this wasn't my mother. A wave of panic surged through me. I jumped up, but before I could react further, I felt my father's half. I was nearly paralyzed with fear. Shaken and barely able to breathe, I scrambled away from him, retreating to my spot in the corner. Even in the darkness, I could now clearly see my father's figure. My heart raced with panic. It hadn't even occurred to me that I might have ended up in my father's bed instead of my mother's. As the realization set in, cold sweat ran down my back. All I could think was how fortunate I was that I woke up. I kept imagining what could have happened if I hadn't stirred in time. My father, having come home drunk again, seemed completely unaware of what was happening. I stayed in my corner, trembling with fear, unsure of what to do. It was stiflingly hot, and the oppressive darkness made my heart race even faster. I stayed seated in that corner for a long time, silently praying to God for the power to come back on. Then, as if in answer to my prayers, the electricity returned, flooding the house with light. Relief washed over me. I turned a fearful glance toward my father, who was still unconscious. My body was trembling as I lay back down, trying to calm myself enough to sleep. I was consumed by thoughts of what could have happened. If I hadn't woken up when I did, how could I have faced what might have come next? the fear weighed heavily on me as I finally drifted off to sleep, only vaguely aware of when morning arrived. At dawn, my mother woke me up to pray Fajr. I hurried to perform my prayers and then returned to my corner. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened during the night. It played on repeat in my mind. How I'd confused my father's bed for my mother's. How close I'd come to an unthinkable situation. Just recalling the moment sent a chill down my spine. My mother had always insisted I stay away from my father. I had never understood her reasoning, but after last night, the reasons had become painfully clear. My mood was somber and heavy all morning. My mother must have noticed because by lunchtime she asked, "Samra, what's wrong? You've been so quiet since morning. Is something bothering you? You can talk to me about anything." I looked up at her, feeling a pang of sadness. I thought about how difficult her life must have been, living with a man like my father. Quietly, I asked, "Ami, did you marry Abba out of love?" My unexpected question caught her off guard. "You've never asked me this before," she said, looking surprised. "Why do you ask now?" But I stayed firm, repeating, "Ami, tell me, did you marry Abba out of choice?" Her expression softened. She let out a faint smile and said, "No, Samra, I didn't choose this marriage. It was your grandfather's decision. I had already given my heart to someone else." When I had mentioned that person's name in front of my father, he had immediately arranged my marriage to your father. I wasn't ready for it at all, because your father had been an alcoholic since his youth. He didn't even stop drinking before the wedding, and after marriage, he had free reign. After that, there was no one to stop him. In the early days of our marriage, I tried hard to get your father to give up this vile habit. I stayed at my parents' house several times, but it didn't make any difference to him. For a few days, he would act fine, only to start up again. Eventually, I had enough and asked for a divorce. That, however, turned out to be the biggest mistake of my life. From that point on, your father made my life unbearable. He didn't divorce me, but he beat me severely and made it very clear that even if it killed him, he would never let me leave. That's why I'm still tied to him. After you were born, I decided that for your sake, I would find the strength to endure. I resolved to stay with your father so that you could have a semblance of a normal life. My mother's eyes were wet as she told me all of this, and I sat there silently listening, staring at her in disbelief. My heart went out to her as I learned about the sacrifices she had made. Without thinking, I stood up and hugged her tightly. It was such an unexpected gesture that my mother just stood there, startled, holding me close. After a moment, she gently pulled me away and asked, "Samra, if there's something bothering you, you can tell me. I don't know why, but you seem very worried." In truth, I was deeply troubled, but I didn't want to burden her with my own fears. I assured her that there was nothing wrong, that I was just worried about how my father was living his life. "Why is he doing this to himself and to us?" I asked. My mother didn't seem convinced. She knew me well, and my sudden question was unlike me. She looked at me closely and asked again, "If there's something you need to say, don't be afraid. I'm here for you." But I couldn't bring myself to say anything more. Instead, I returned to my seat and ate my meal in silence. I could feel her watching me, her sharp gaze filled with concern. I avoided meeting her eyes and quietly finished eating. Afterward, I took my plate to the kitchen, washed it, and sat down there for a while, lost in thought. I found myself wondering about life. Some people's lives seemed so simple, so carefree, while mine felt so full of challenges. That single, unexpected incident had shaken me so deeply that I could hardly think straight. I kept replaying that moment in my head, when I had mistakenly gotten into my father's bed, thinking it was my mother's. That memory haunted me. I remembered feeling his half-conscious body shift, his leg resting on me in my sudden terror. And then, the overwhelming shock of sensing his hand on my stomach. The realization made my blood run cold. I had immediately scrambled away, back to my spot in the corner, trembling and drenched in sweat. Now, as I sat in the kitchen, I understood what my mother had always meant. A woman's honor is fragile, and a man's intentions can change in an instant. Hearing my mother's own story brought tears to my eyes. I started thinking less about that night's incident and more about my mother's life. In my heart, I resolved that I would do whatever it took to set my father straight. If things continued as they were, not only would my mother's life remain miserable, but mine would spiral downward as well. Even my mother's side of the family had severed ties with us because of all these issues, and my father's side didn't consider us worth speaking to. It was up to me to make things right somehow. My mother was a simple woman. During the day, she worked in other people's homes to make ends meet. At night, my father would come home, forcibly take money from her, and disappear with a bottle of alcohol. Watching this routine unfold broke my heart, and I felt immense pity for my mother's plight. At first, I felt powerless because of my father's intimidating presence and my mother's tendency to keep me hidden. But now I was determined to do something, anything, to fix the situation. My father's addiction had ruined him to the point where he no longer recognized the boundary between his wife and daughter. The day passed as usual. My mother kept repeating the same question, asking me why I was so quiet, but I didn't tell her what was on my mind. As night fell, my father came home around 8, as he usually did, making a scene. I was sitting on my bed when his sudden arrival startled me. I stood up, watching as he demanded money from my mother again. My anger boiled as I saw my mother repeating over and over that she didn't have enough money to give him. He wouldn't listen. Soon he started throwing things around the house. My patience had reached its limit. I stood up and shouted so loudly that it froze both my mother and father in place. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Enough. No more of this nonsense in this house. You've done more than enough. If you want to stay here, you can't live like this anymore. You should leave because my mother and I can manage on our own." Both of them stared at me in shock. My voice had been so loud that even I was taken aback. Every part of my body trembled as I continued. My father, stunned, responded, "Samra, have you lost your mind? Is this how you talk to your father? Have you forgotten your manners?" His words made my blood boil. I replied, "Yes, I've forgotten because you're no father. You've turned my mother's life into hell, and now you're here again, begging like a pauper. Have you no shame? A father is supposed to be the pillar of a home, and you've become a curse for us." I knew my mother wouldn't approve of what I was saying. She had always taught me to respect my elders, but I couldn't hold back. Everything I felt poured out of me without restraint. My father, seething, lunged at me to strike, but my mother stepped in front of him like a shield. She pushed him away and said, "Don't you dare lay a hand on my daughter. I'll break your hands if you try." I knew my mother would never let anything happen to me. That's why I spoke so boldly to my father. When he saw my mother and me standing together, he left in a huff, cursing and shouting. My mother turned to me, her face livid, and without a word landed a sharp slap across my cheek. The impact was so strong that I stumbled and fell. Her voice quivered with anger as she said, "When did you become so disrespectful? I raised you to respect your elders, and today you spoke to your father like that?" Her words ignited a fire within me. I yelled back, "That man deserves it, and worse. Someone who disrespects his wife and daughter, who curses at us in our own home, who drinks until he's out of his senses, has no honor in my eyes." I knew these were harsh words to say about my own father, but I couldn't hold back. My love for my mother outweighed any love I might have had for my father. My mother stared at me, stunned. I had always been a cheerful girl, but after that night, my entire perspective had changed. I could no longer turn a blind eye to my father's behavior. My eyes had been opened, and I was beginning to see everything clearly for the first time. My mother walked away silently, leaving me to sit and think. I knew I had to find a way to remove my father from our lives so that we could finally live in peace. It wouldn't be easy, especially because my mother, like many traditional women, believed that no matter how bad things got, she could never leave her husband. But I had made up my mind. I would get my father out of our lives and live alone with my mother. The next morning, my father came home at dawn. His bloodshot eyes revealed he hadn't gotten his fix overnight, and it had left him agitated. He burst into the house, shouting and cursing at my mother, demanding money. But this time, I was ready. I stood my ground and gave him a piece of my mind. My father couldn't believe it. The girl talking back to him wasn't a stranger. It was his own daughter, someone he'd never paid attention to before. Enraged, he tried to strike me again, but my mother intervened. He stormed out, fuming. My mother grabbed my arm tightly and shook me. "What's gotten into you? You were never like this. Why are you speaking to your father that way?" Her voice was filled with both pain and frustration. I looked at her and said, "Amma, I'm not a child anymore. I understand everything now. I understand why you always told me to protect my honor, why you always told me to stay away from him. I understand it all. You don't need to stay with him anymore. We can live alone, just the two of us, and be happy. You already work, and I'll work too. We don't need a drunkard in our lives." Tears welled up in my mother's eyes as she cupped my face in her hands. "Samra, if something happened, tell me. I feel like something terrible happened to you that made you so bitter." I realized this was the moment. It was time to tell her everything. I began to slowly tell her what had happened, that my father had tried to violate my dignity, using the darkness to his advantage. He had tried to pull me close as if I were not his daughter. My mother stared at me, eyes wide with shock. Shaking me by the shoulders, she cried, "What were you thinking? Couldn't you tell it wasn't me but your father?" Her words left me silent for a moment, but I replied, "Even if I didn't realize it was him, he knew very well it was me, his daughter. How could he forget that it was not you but me lying next to him?" My mother was speechless. Without saying another word, she got up and walked away. I had anticipated this reaction, yet it still hurt to see her withdraw into silence. That evening, when my father came home, my mother refused to let him enter the house. He caused a scene, shouting and cursing at the door, but she stood her ground and would not let him in. Determined, she declared that she would never allow him inside again. Eventually, my father left, swearing at us as he went. I was stunned. I never expected my mother to shut him out completely. I tried to ask her why she did it, but she wouldn't respond. She had stopped talking to me altogether.